Good morning, students, and welcome to the class of English. Children, today in this video, I'll give you a quick summary of the chapter 1 of Hornbill, The Portrait of a Lady by Khuswant Singh. You can see, children, Khuswant Singh, born on 1915, and he passed away in the year 2014. He is a noted writer and journalist, diplomat, and lawyer, best known for his literary works. He won Padma Bhushan, Padma Vibhushan, and Sahitya Academy Award. He wrote his most notable work, Train to Pakistan, recounting his experiences of the partition of India. Children, let me remind you that Train to Pakistan is the most notable work of Khuswant Singh, which is based on the 1947 partition of India. And a movie has also been made on this novel. If we talk about the important works of Khuswant Singh, so here they are: The Mark of Vishnu and Other Stories, The History of Sikhs, Train to Pakistan, The Voice of God and Other Stories. I shall not hear the nightingale, The Sikhs Today, The Fall of the Kingdom of the Punjab, A History of the Sikhs, Ranjit Singh, the Maharaja of the Punjab, Gadar 1915, India's first armed revolution. Some short stories by Khuswant Singh: The Portrait of a Lady, The Strain, Success Mantra, A Love Affair in London, Na Kahu Se Dosti, Na Kahu Se Bair, The Vogue. Children, in this story, narrator is portraying the character of his grandmother. When narrator was a small kid, he observes his grandmother as a terribly old lady with wrinkles on her face, and it was difficult for the narrator to believe that once his grandmother was a young and beautiful lady. Right now, she was fat and bent. If we talk about the settings of this story, so the initial part of the story is set in rural Punjab, India. Khuswant Singh describes the village school that was attached to the temple and how, with his grandmother, he would walk to school along the narrow lanes of the village. The second part of the story is set in the city after Khuswant Singh and his grandmother moved there to join the parents. If we talk about the character sketch of grandmother, she was affectionate and caring as she took good care of little Khuswant when he stayed with her in the village, away from his parents. She was responsible because, despite being very old, she did everything for her grandson: woke him up, fed him, bathed him, escorted him to school, and got his slate, inkpot, and pen ready. She is a good storyteller, as she narrated tales of the prophets and incidents from her childhood. She is religious too, because she visited the temple daily, where she read the holy scriptures while Khuswant Singh studied in school. She constantly tells the bead of her rosary and prayed silently, distressed that there was no religious education in the city school. The author had three phases of relationship with his grandmother. In the village, the author was good friend with his grandmother. In the city, though they shared the same room, but they saw less of each other. Third phase, when author went to university, he got a separate room and they became more distant. If we talk about the climax of the story, so the story reaches its climax when Khuswan Singh and his grandmother moved to the city, as this brings a turning point in their relationship. The writer's grandmother is no longer able to escort him to the city school as he has begun to use a motor bus. Further, his grandmother does not approve of science and music in the city school because she thought that it is meant for harlots and beggars. She is also upset when she learns that there is no teaching about God and the scriptures. There are three reasons why the author's grandmother was disturbed with the city education. She was unhappy to know about the concept he was taught at school. In village school, author was taught about holy scriptures also. But in city school, he was taught about English, math, science, which was a difficult thing for grandmother. She was distressed that there is no teaching about God and scriptures, and she was very disturbed that he was given music lessons. And then she really talked to the author. The odd way in which the author's grandmother behaved before she died. A change came over her when she was in the bed as she was ill. She didn't pray. She collected the women of the neighborhood, got an old drum, and started to sing of the homecoming of warriors. The author's family had to persuade her to stop, avoid, overstraining. Children, the portrait of a lady is written in the first person and is in the biographical mode. In this story, the writer gives a detailed account of his grandmother, with whom he had a long association. Khuswant Singh recalls his grandmother as short, fat, and slightly bent. Children, if we talk about the short summary of this chapter, so the story is about the author and his grandmother. The grandmother was an old woman with a wrinkled face. The author had always seen her like this for the past 20 years, and she appeared to be so old that the author could not imagine that once she could be young and pretty. She could have a husband. She was actually short, fat, and slightly bent. The author had seen his grandfather's portrait, an old man with a turban and a long white beard covering his chest. So, the grandfather was also very old in the portrait. So, the author could not believe that he could have a wife and children, but he believed that he appears like having a lots of grandchildren. His grandmother used to move around the house in spotless white. Spotless white means white sari and grey hair, with her one hand resting on her waist and her other hand counting the beads of her rosary. In the initial days, the author and his grandmother had a good relationship. She used to wake him up and get him ready for school. She used to pack the things required by him for the day and walked him to school every day, like slate, tiffin box, pencil, like that. She used to visit the temple that was attached to the school. She had a routine of reading the holy scriptures. The author, along with other children, sat on the veranda singing alphabets and morning prayers. They both used to come back home together with stray dogs roaming around them as grandmother would carry the stale chapatis to feed them while returning home from school. Soon the parents of the author who went to the city to settle in, they called them, both the grandmother and the author. As they reached the city, the relationship of the author with the grandmother took a sharp turn. Though they shared the room, their bond grew apart. The author started going to an English medium school, and she no longer accompanied him to his school. And there were no longer stray dogs who roamed around them while walking back home. She, however, used to ask him about his day and what he had learned. She didn't understand anything as everything was in another language, which she could not understand. She didn't approve of the new syllabus that he was studying because she thought that they did not teach him about God and the scriptures, and they saw less of each other. As the days passed, he grew older, the narrator, and soon went to the university. Now he had his own room, and this made his relationship with the grandmother even more sour. She stopped talking to everyone and spent her whole day sitting at her spinning wheel, reciting prayers, and moving beads of the rosary with one hand. However, she loved feeding sparrows in the veranda at dawn. Breaking bread into pieces and feeding it to the birds was her daily routine. The birds would sit on her legs, her head, and some even on the shoulders. Soon the author decided to go abroad for further studies. Grandmother came to the railway station to see him off. In fact, she was not sentimental, but she was continuously reciting her prayers. Children, as the grandmother was old and anything could happen to her. But the grandmother wanted to see the grandson when he returns from abroad. Grandmother kissed the narrator on the forehead. After 5 years, narrator returned home. Grandmother was there. She came at the station to pick the narrator, and she was still the same as she had been 5 years ago. She clasped him within her arms and didn't say a word. She still used to feed sparrows. One day she didn't recite her prayers, but instead collected the women of the neighborhood, got a drum, and started thumping it and singing. The next morning she fell ill. She had mild fever. The doctor said that there was nothing to worry about, but she was sure that her end was near. She didn't want to waste her time talking to anyone in the family anymore, but spend her last hours in reciting her prayers, laying on the bed. She died, and her body lay on the bed lifeless. As they prepared for her funeral, they saw all the sparrows sitting in the veranda. They were not chirping, no noise was there. They were silent. And when a lady of the house gave breadcrumbs to them, they didn't pay heed. As they were there mourning the death of the grandmother, as the grandmother's body was taken away, all the sparrows also flew away. So, children, it was a small summary about the chapter. That's all in this video. Thanks for watching. Thank you.